When you are deciding between a marriage-based green card and a fiancé visa, your equation, what you're looking at, is going to be very different for 2026 than it was for 2024 or even 2025. Today, I will be talking about the 3 things you need to consider when you are trying to decide between a marriage-based green card and a fiancé visa. I am attorney Lilian Chukwurah, and for the past 10 years, I have been helping my clients get green cards and citizenships for themselves and their family using the U.S. immigration law system. The first thing you need to consider is the process. The process for a fiancé visa is very different from the process for a marriage-based green card. Both processes start the same way. Your fiancé or your spouse is outside of the United States and you would like to file for them to come to the US. That's where everyone starts from this equation, right? If you are still engaged and not married, now you are considering whether to just file as a fiancé or to go and get married and then file as married. There are 2 steps to a marriage-based green card. The first step is the I-130, which takes place with USCIS. You file an I-130 with USCIS with the supporting documents showing that your marriage is real and that you are legally married. Once that is approved, it is sent over to the National Visa Center to start the actual visa process, where you would do a DS-260, an affidavit of support, and upload the necessary documents. After the National Visa Center has received all the required documents, you will then be put in line for an interview. Once that interview takes place, your spouse is approved, they get their visa, they travel to the US, and once they enter the US with that visa, they are automatically a permanent resident. The fiancé visa, on the other hand, has 3 steps to it. The first step is the I-129F, where you basically say, this is my fiancé, this is the proof that we have seen each other within the past 2 years, and that we meet all the requirements for a fiancé visa. Once USCIS processes that application, approves it, it is sent over again to the National Visa Center, which will then forward that application to the embassy. You will need to do a DS-160, an I-134, which is kind of the non-immigrant visa version of the affidavit of support on the marriage side. Once all of those applications are done, you will now be scheduled for an interview with the embassy. Here's the difference. The embassy will either schedule the interview for you, or they will have a process for you to schedule that interview. You have to be very specific about your embassy and know how they will handle that process. Once your fiancé has the interview and is approved, they will get a K-1 visa to the US. Once they enter the US, you have to get married within 90 days of them being in the US. Once they enter the US and you two get married within 90 days, then you can start step 3, which is where you apply for adjustment of status for your now spouse. They will need an I-485 with an affidavit of support, I-864, for that process to be filed with USCIS. Once USCIS processes that application, maybe schedules you for an interview, approves you, now they are now a permanent resident. So the steps are the crucial part. The steps are something to think about, because on the marriage-based side, you are looking at coming into the US already a permanent resident, versus with the K-1, you are coming into the US with a K-1 and then applying for a green card. So this is something to consider if that makes a difference for you. As you can see, the fiancé visa has more steps than the marriage-based visa, but let's talk about the next consideration. Once you know the steps, your next question is probably, how long does this take, right? What am I looking at for a timeline? Well, it's really going to depend on what country you're in, because the calculation we're doing in 2025, at least the beginning of 2025, is no longer the calculation we're doing in 2026. The first thing we need to consider is, where does your fiance or your spouse live? The country that they are from is going to decide whether they are able to actually get the visa to the US. As you all know, we have multiple travel bans and pauses going on. We have countries that have a partial travel ban, countries that have a full travel ban, and then countries that have the 75 pause. So when you are thinking about timeline, you need to take into consideration the pauses and the bans. For a typical marriage-based green card, you start, like I said, with an I-130. That I-130 can take anywhere from a year to a year and a half for USCIS to approve it. Once it's approved and sent over to the National Visa Center, you are basically going to try to get your documents in as quickly as possible to get documentally qualified and in line for an interview. Once you are in line for an interview, it's going to depend on your country. So some countries, it can take 6 months or less to get that interview, and other countries it's going to take 2 years or more. If your country is on the travel ban list, your timeline is going to be open-ended, because we do not know when those travel bans are going to end, especially for a marriage-based green card. So a marriage-based green card is an immigrant visa, and all the travel bans affect immigrant visas. If your country is part of the 39 countries on the travel ban list, it does not matter whether it is a partial travel ban or a full travel ban. Immigrant visas are affected, and there are no waivers except for the national interest waiver. And unless you meet the requirements for that waiver, you would not be able to get your application pushed through. So that significantly affects the timeline for people from those countries. If your spouse is from one of the countries on the 75 pause countries, but they are not also on the travel ban countries, what is going to happen is, once the National Visa Center processes your application, sends it over to the embassy will schedule your interview as normal. So if you are not on the travel ban and just on the 75 pause, you will still be able to go through the normal process, go through that interview. But just know, at that interview, the officer is going to refuse you the visa because of the pause, not because you don't qualify for it. So those two things, the 75 pause and the travel ban, will make the process very long and open-ended, because now we don't know when the travel ban is going to end, when the pause is going to end. So that is going to make it a whole lot tougher for you to actually be able to know an actual timeline when it comes to the marriage-based process. I know that does not sound like I'm giving you concrete answers. I am giving you the reality of the situation. The concrete answer is the I-130 is going to take a year to a year and a half to be processed and approved. And the visa section is going to take however long it takes for your country to be able to schedule you for an interview and be able to approve your case. And if you are on the 39 countries on the travel ban and or on the 75 countries on the pause, that amount of time is going to be exponentially longer for you. For the fiancé visa, the timeline is again in 3 stages. The first is with USCIS, which is taking about 8 to 12 months. The second is with the embassy. The thing that affects the embassy timeline is also the thing that affects the marriage-based embassy timeline, right? Is your country on the travel ban list? And if it is it a full travel ban or is it a partial travel ban? Remember, a K-1 visa is a non-immigrant visa. It is very different from a marriage-based visa. So if your country is on a partial travel ban, that means you can still get your K-1 visa pushed through and approved, and you can travel to the US on your K-1. If your country is on a full travel ban, unfortunately, the K-1, just like the marriage-based one, is not going to be pushed through. You will need to wait for that travel ban to be lifted. Same thing with the 75 country pause. The 75 country pause is for immigrant visas, not non-immigrant visas. So the 75 country pause will affect marriage-based green card timelines, whereas it will not affect a fiancé visa timeline. So that makes a huge difference when you are thinking about how long everything is going to take. It is going to depend on where you are, where you're from, if there's a travel ban, and also what type of travel ban you are facing. So for example, if you are from Nigeria, you know you cannot file for, your spouse is not getting an interview, but your fiance will get an interview. So then if you are not married yet, and you want to go through that process, you may want to consider doing a fiancé visa versus a marriage-based visa. So that's why I say the first part is where you start, right? Knowing what the steps are. But this part, the timeline, is what really is going to make a difference for a lot of people, especially with what we have going on right now in 2026, which are the 39 country bans and the 75 countries that are on the pause. So with those two things in mind, your timeline is going to really depend, and which option you choose is also going to depend on if you are on any of these travel bans. So when you are trying to decide between a marriage-based green card and a fiancé visa, you need to consider the steps involved, the time involved, and finally, the money involved. Because the marriage-based green card is a two-step process, the quick answer here is that the marriage-based green card is going to cost you less than a fiancé visa. And that is just based on the process, right? The process for a marriage-based visa is a two-step process. The I-130 with USCIS can cost between $625 and $675. Then the visa fees and the affidavit of support fees, which would be about $445. Then when your spouse comes to the US, they just have to pay the fee for their card to actually be printed by USCIS, which is around $200. For the fiancé visa, you need to file an I-129F, which will cost you $675. Then you need to pay for the visa fee, which is about $265. And finally, once they're in the US and you're applying for adjustment of status, you would need to pay for the adjustment of status, which right now is $1,440. And if you want to include a work permit application with that, it is an additional $260. So that is the finances of the process. And again, with the way the economy is right now, I know financial considerations are really important. So that's why I wanted to include it in this video as one of the things to consider. The fiancé visa is going to cost you thousands more than a marriage-based visa. However, if your country, right, if your country is on a partial travel ban or on the 75 countries that are on a pause, that equation changes, right? The time frame may now become more important than the financials, right? You may be okay with paying more to get them here faster than saving the money to wait out whenever that travel ban or pause is lifted. If you are finding value out of this video, please go ahead and hit the like button. Share this with anyone you know that is considering starting their immigration journey. And if you want to follow us on all our other social medias, please feel free to do that. So those are the three things you need to really weigh. But I always tell people to start with which one of these three are the most important to you, and then consider everything else later, right? Figure out, is the timeline the most important because of the country your spouse or fiance is from? Or is the money the most important? Because the timeline doesn't even matter because they're in a country that doesn't have any bans or pauses or anything. Or are you not trying to have 3 steps? Because again, when your fiance comes to the US, they do not have the ability to work. They do not have permanent residency. You still have to apply for the permanent residency. Whereas for a marriage base, when they come into the US with that visa, immediately they touch US soil, they are permanent residents. So that consideration is different. But again, start with which one is the most important to you. And 9 times out of 10, the timeline is the most important to most people. So that's going to be your biggest consideration. And if you need help figuring out which option to go with and how choosing one is more beneficial than the other, please feel free to reach out to me. I am more than happy to speak with you and figure out what your best option is and see if we can help you get that option to completion. So if you would like to schedule a consultation with me, you can do that by going to my website, lilylegal.com, click on contact us, and you can pick a date and time that works best for you for us to chat about your situation.